Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure, all through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, your producer and co-host. Folks, I'm glad you're here. So awesome to have you with us. Listen, today we have one of our faves returning to the show, talking about Mr. Donald Miller. Don Miller, the consulting, coaching guru for decades now, celebrated author, speaker, one of our faves. As I said, the mystery is he an Enneagram 3? Is he an Enneagram 4? Maybe we find out on this episode. So glad you're here. Listen, hang tight. This is a really good conversation, and we go all sorts of fun directions. Really, really good stuff here. Glad you're here with us. That's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And now here is the host with the most, Ian Cron.
Hey, Typology friends, Ian Morgan Cron here once again on the podcast Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm joined by my good friend, producer, confrere, Anthony Skinner. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
As I told you earlier, today's been a heck of a day, and I'm better now that I'm sitting with you and our guest.
And our guest, yes, indeed, my good friend, Enneagram 3, possibly. Enneagram 4, possibly. The author, the coach, builder, Donald Miller. Donald, welcome to the show again.
Hi, guys. Good to be with you.
So the last time we were together, now I have to just say something here, and this is a compliment. I, for years, have said I have rarely met someone in my life who moved through such radical transformation of personality like you did. When we first met, gosh, this is when Blue Like Jazz was hot. The person you were then, as opposed to the person you are now, is like meeting two different people. So surely that's your experience of your own life.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I just, you know what? I was with somebody on my team earlier today, and we were going to talk about this. Well, he's the YouTube guy. He's the guy who handles our YouTube channel. And we thought we should make a video, because I've never done it, about the transformation from 25 years ago and talk about what's changed. And I thought, that would be kind of interesting. And so we started Googling pictures and found pictures of me at 400 pounds. I'm 178 right now as of this morning, but who's counting?
Right.
And then I had lunch with an old friend today, and he brought it up, and he said, I remember when you used to walk through a door sideways to get through the door. He said, what was funny is after you lost weight, you would still walk through the door sideways because you thought you were just used to walking through a door sideways. This is Michael Hyatt.
Yeah.
And that I drove away from that lunch thinking, wow, I can hardly remember living that way. And the real thing was, that's the physical manifestation of what was going on inside, which I hope is very different. Well, it's got to be very different now than what it was then. So yeah, it'd be fun to explore that. I've not really honestly sat down to try to chart the plot points of that transformation, because when you're so close to it, you don't always know what's happening. And it sounds like we're going to tell a story about weight loss. It's much more than that. In fact, it's a story of a person who identified as a victim transforming into a person who identifies as much more of a person who's playing a more meaningful role on the planet, and also considers victim mentality to be the enemy of self-development and progress and happiness and those sorts of things. So maybe it's the transformation or the journey of crawling out of a victim hole and engaging life on with a better perspective. I think that's, and again, I haven't explored this in my own mind yet, but that might be it.
What do you feel like you tapped into that was sort of a pivotal moment for you? And then I wonder if it does relate to you being a 3 at all.
Cocaine.
That'll make you lose weight.
For the record, I have never done cocaine. That was just, Anthony, that was a softball just going right over. I had to hit that one. I think I tapped into, well, first of all, if I was still that guy, I am 100% confident I'd be dead.
Wow.
I wouldn't have made it to 52. I mean, at 400 pounds, you're not going to live much, probably past 40. So I'd be dead. I would certainly not be married. I would certainly not be a father. I think I was writing. I might have written a few more books, and they might have been pretty good books. Because there's a lot of navel gazing when you're a victim. You're analyzing a lot of what happened to you and that sort of thing. And I think that I never wanted to be that big, and I never wanted to be that much of a loser. I think I discovered a lot of self-exploration, a lot of therapy. The Enneagram was massive in my transformation because, you said maybe 3, maybe 4. I was certainly 100% a 4 during this time. And then I would now say I'm 100% a 3. I realize people don't change, but it's now confusing to me because there's so much less 4 energy, if you will, operating in me than there used to be. It's not that I know a lot of 4s who are in terrific shape, and but for me, I think a 4 mentality lends itself a little bit to introspection and self-analysis, and maybe a little bit of woe is me. Struggling artist. I wasn't a starving artist. I was very well fed, it turns out. But and so it has helped me to embrace much more of what I maybe thought was a 3-wing that now I think is the opposite. I think more of a 3 with a 4-wing. So so all that I think is part of the journey, tapping into the sort of weariness of being the victim and wanting, looking at everybody else enjoying life and realizing this victim mentality isn't working.
So did you over-identify who you were with the suffering story of your past in those days?
Yes.
Okay. So what's interesting, that's very 4, right? Like 4s romanticize, idealize, resent, and both fully embrace the story of how they lost this missing piece and how it made them different and how it...
And they're unique and they're special.
Yes,
and only I am cast out.
Yes.
I remember, you can analyze this, Ian. I remember I used to have actual victim fantasies.
Really?
Like I don't know why I say all this stuff when I'm on your podcast. This is stuff I would never say because it's just so goofy. But I remember hundreds of hours fantasizing that I was in a family, that I'd grown up in a family with a father who was abusive. And at 18 or so, I broke away and never spoke to him again and became a billionaire. I used to have that weird fantasy, and my father left when I was 2. I never had a dad, so and then one day I woke up, I'm like, why are you always thinking about this? Why are you always trying to play this role in your imagination? Partly this is the life of a writer. Also, yes. Writers are always trying to figure out scenarios and novels and stories and what would it feel like to be that person. But I kept being attracted to that narrative and realized, this is like there's something about the victim narrative fantasy that comforts you.
Yes. It's kind of delicious.
It is delicious. It's as Rabbi Lapin says, it's seductive.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So were you a person that was prone to envy in those days? Like, did you look at other people and think, if only I could be, if only I had that education or that background, or if I'd only had as happy a family as so-and-so had, or was envy in the mix of coloring your interior world?
Yes, but I wouldn't have been self-aware enough to recognize that. It was just, I didn't like those people and I felt threatened by them. I didn't like them and I felt extremely threatened by them, and very, very threatened by them. And, but I wouldn't have known at the time it was envy. In fact, it was only reading a book before The Road Back to You came out. I read a book by is it Riso and
Yeah.
Hudson, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, and reading about the four's tendency toward envy.
Yeah.
That I realized, oh, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Then when I saw that, the self-awareness helped me get rid of it.
Do you think that envy? I recently read an article about the upside of envy, and basically as a as a motivator, right? So do you think envy motivated you to achieve and get things that others had that you wanted, that you felt you were missing?
I still can't fully identify with comparing myself to others all that much, because at some point that became kind of too painful because the chasm was I was too far behind everybody. Mm-hmm. So I think it was more like me, first of all, in the literary field, I discovered that I could write. And when I wrote, people thought I was interesting, or let's just say valuable in some way. And it was the only thing I had. That was it. So there's, without question, all of the thousands and thousands of hours reading and writing were about me trying to get some crumbs under the table. And that worked really well. And so I kept doing it. And then that was, then people, they'd come to book readings and want an autograph or things like that. And that began to be a little bit, quite honestly, a healing balm for my radical feelings of insecurity and insufficiency. At least there was one thing that I did mildly better than most people. And I think at the time, I believed that it was not mildly better. I believed it was a lot better. Mm-hmm. I believed I was a really good writer. What's funny is I'm now rewriting a book for a re-release of it, and it's awful. I'm just like, this book was so horribly written that I'm so grateful, delusional fantasies, that I was actually a good writer, because I was not. But, there were some stories in there that people liked, and people, and so that was, we talk about therapy as healing. Success is also healing. I would say it's just as healing. Going out and doing something and doing it well and having people turn around and say, hey, you're good at that, is very healing. And along with therapy and spirituality and relationships. But I do think chalking up some wins is if you're open to it, is pretty good for building up esteem.
So I often wonder with you, and I'll tell you, you're probably one of 2 or 3 people I know who, when I look at you and think about the Enneagram, I kind of scratch my head and I go, I don't know. And I work with a lot of people, and I work in depth coaching with people, right?
But you know more about the Enneagram than, you have explained things to me about people, often like, dead presidents, how they were wired. That has just been so unbelievably perspective shifting as I look out at the social landscape,
Well,
and you and I, we can't get into it, but you and I have had great conversations about Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's still alive. I understand that. But,
yes,
about what makes that's just, me, it's just really fascinating. You should do a whole episode.
By the way, I met him for a second in San Miguel de Allende. I'm in a coffee shop. I'm in a coffee shop in San Miguel. It's the place I went every single morning at 8:00 before I jumped into hardcore writing for the day. And a couple of guys come in with their ears wired, looking around and wearing like athleisure wear, And then the next thing I know, I look up and I see this guy's profile, and there's Bill Clinton and Hillary and another.
Now that shocks me even more. They starting to wonder if they have an actual marriage.
Well, they were together in San Miguel de Allende. There they were. So anyway.
Good for them.
I probably could have had my moment to ask him. Anyway, so there is a version of 4. This is why I'm asking this question. It's actually my type, right? It's that self-preservation 4. And the self-preservation 4 is the counter type of the 4. So counter types are super important. As you know, there are 3 for each type. It's what happens when the passion of the type meets the dominant instinct inside of that person, according to Naranjo. And for 4s and 6s, the 3 subtypes of those 2 types are so different from each other, they might as well be their own numbers. So for your sake, but more for the sake of people listening, check this out. The self-preservation 4 is called the glad 4. The social 4 is called the mad 4. It's called the sad 4. And the 1-to-1 or sexual subtype is called the mad 4. So sometimes the self-pres 4 is called the sunny 4. And they often get confused with 1s, 3s, and 7s. In fact, for the longest time, when I took poorly constructed Enneagram tests, I would come out as a 3 or a 7, like every single time. And none of it fit. I would go, I would try on that set of clothes for a 3 or a 7. I'd go, too tight. It doesn't fit. Everything, just doesn't fit. And then when I learned about self-pres 4s, it was like the biggest penny drop I ever heard in my life. It was like, whoa, right? So their name used to be Dauntless, and now the Beatrice Chestnut uses the word tenacity for them. And so they experience envy like the other 2 4s do, but they communicate suffering and envy less than those other 2 subtypes.
Do they identify with it less, but still feel it? So it's kind of masked?
They still feel it. Yes, maybe in a more muted fashion. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to gauge that or to compare that to others for my own experience. But these, rather than talking about their suffering like social 4s do, right? These are more long-suffering people, okay? In the sense that they learn to kind of endure pain without wincing a lot, And they're just they're just more stoic and strong in the face of pain than the other 2 4s are, right?
Like actual physical pain?
No, just I think emotional pain. They're more stoic.
That's interesting because this is making recent history make sense to me, because I was recently in the hospital. Everything has turned out great. I'm going to live to be 90, but diagnosed with heart failure. And the prognosis on heart failure is 1 to 5 years. And I'm in the best shape of my life. I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. I have 0 symptoms. And what we think has happened, by the way, I'm on meds and they're expecting a 100% full recovery, and I'm going to live to be an old man. In fact, because of the diagnosis and because of the changes that I've made, they actually say you're probably going to live longer than you would have, because you have no blockages of arteries. You have my calcium score is 57 at 100. They want you to start watching your diet. Arteries of a teenager. What they think did it, they're not sure, was I got into cold plunging, and on a -1 degree day, -1 Fahrenheit, spent 15 minutes in a swimming pool, toughing it out, trying to get as cold as I possibly could. Got out. 6 hours later, I was still shivering.
Oh.
And I enjoyed it. I freaking loved it.
Wow.
And still do it. Not at those temperatures, because for obvious reasons, but still do it. And I've kind of wondered, like, that just isn't me. Like, I'm not a tough guy. I'm not like a Arnold Schwarzenegger, tough Enneagram 8. But I wondered, where the heck does that come from?
Yeah.
Have you been spending time with David Goggins?
Yeah.
That dude's on another level.
So
he would call that a win.
Yeah.
You want 17 minutes?
But
let me show you how to shut down your heart for 10 minutes, Don.
Yeah, Don, I wouldn't encourage that again, buddy. But it's
no, I'm not going to do that again. I choose to live.
What's so just sort of interesting to me is that in this self-preservation 4, envy is less apparent. And instead of dwelling in and expressing it and kind of like getting the victim mentality thing going on, this 4 works hard to get what others have that he or she perceives they lack.
Oh, I see. I can see that.
Okay.
I can see that, because a big part of my identity when I was young was growing up poor. We grew up very, very poor. And money was not a big motivator to me until I started a company and then realized how easily I could make it. And then have done it. I mean, live in a house that others might call very showy, drive a nice car, all those kinds of things. But I remember, but there's part of me that just doesn't want to be the kid from the wrong side of the tracks still.
So it's interesting about this 4 too, that instead of like camping out in their longing, right? That prevents them from taking action, right? What they do is they strive to get those distant things that give them the feeling of being able to get that which was lost. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it's never enough. But it's never enough.
What do you mean by which was lost? You mean, I would say which I never had.
Okay.
But which was lost would imply like you had it once and there's a loss aversion motivation.
Yeah, I like lost though too, because sometimes I think in the mind of a 4, it's like there's this sort of epic story of something that I had that was lost or that was taken from me, and I don't know why. It's an unnameable problem, whatever. All this to say, I'm just fascinated. I actually think about you a lot in this regard, like through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm like, because you had such a startling shift. And I rarely see that kind of start. I mean, I see people relatively quickly, right? Most people, the shift seems more incremental to me, more imperceptible over time. Yours was quite sudden, relatively speaking.
Well, that's from your perspective.
True.
I mean, if I wrote a weight loss book, it would be like how to lose 3 pounds in 1 year and keep it off.
Yeah, right. But
because it's been a little bit. But I will say, like you and I kind of came to know each other probably right about the time that I got married, and that would have been a punctuated evolution and transformation for me. Was marrying Betsy, and just like the unbelievable health that woman brought into my life. She is the number one. Now, I had already transformed enough to be compatible with a healthy person, but I would say that was like pouring jet fuel into my tank and just started transforming a lot faster. The other thing that's really interesting, Ian, I'd love your perspective on this, if this is a 4 characteristic, but I really 100% buy into the idea that people can dramatically change and become whole different people. I'm not talking about talented Mr. Ripley, but I am talking about like every morning I've got this cold plunge in my garage, and it's set at 45 degrees, so I'm not doing stupid stuff. And I set a timer. I get out at 3 minutes. I don't mess around. But it gives me what I need in terms of, it is miracle kind of stuff, cold plunging. You have to be very careful with your heart. But like my A1C has gone from 5.9 to 5.0 with no dietary changes just because of cold plunging. So it's, I have a 3-year-old. I'm 52 years old. I'm doing everything I can to stick around until I'm 90. But I will, because the cold plunge evaporates over time and because it's got an ozone filter, I don't replace the water. So what I do is I get a tall glass of water every morning when I cold plunge, and I close my eyes and I pour some new characteristic into myself with the ritual of pouring water into the cold plunge. So I will pour kindness into my heart. I will pour self-discipline into my mind. I will pour good words into the book that I'm going to work on. Occasionally, I'm selfless enough to pour it in for somebody else. A buddy of mine was going to meet his hero the other day, and I poured peace and calm into his heart as he met his hero. Things like that. But it's all about the theme there. The morning theme is transform.
Mm-hmm.
Become somebody.
So I agree 100% with you, right? Like I am in complete alignment that I believe that people can experience profound transformation at the deepest cellular level psychologically, I don't think it's necessarily easy. I think some people have an easier time of it than others. That's just nature of life, Some people have steeper stairs to climb, But I do believe that people can experience really, really profound change, but they have to be ready. Anthony and I have spent a lot of time, talking about this process. I don't know all that goes into it, but I think but readiness has to be in the equation,
Yeah.
And I don't think
desire,
timing, good mentorship.
I mean, how cool that everybody listening can a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, no longer have a part of themselves that they're frustrated with, or that any shortcoming you discover about yourself in your work, I think can be transformed or be dealt with.
Yes.
over
Yeah.
time.
And we talk about this a lot. I'd say in the last few years, and in fact, I'm going to give you a manuscript of a book of mine in about 2 months to look at it. That it's finished.
Can't
It's
wait.
finished, but it's just being in the micro edits now. But part of it is about a radical transformation in my own life. What's interesting is that, which came about in large measure because of my relationship and my working of the 12 steps. Having a design for living is number one, I think, helpful. Good mentorship is really helpful in the journey. And yet there is this crazy kind of, how would I say this? I can only frame it in spiritual terms, right? There's some experience of powerlessness and a moment of despair, a moment where you have reached the end of your own rope and you say, you literally cry out your consent to God to do in you what you can't do for yourself. And then suddenly something shifts, which isn't to say that
I can't wait to read this book.
Well, which isn't to say that you don't participate in the transformation, but largely it is the work of some other power greater than you.
I 100% agree with that. I think, in fact, I would say that I don't. If somebody said, "How do you transform?" I really wouldn't know, except if you have the desire, it'll take care of itself.
Yes.
So maybe the desire is an invitation to God.
Yes.
Say, hey, will you work it? Will you work this in me?
Yeah. Well, in the rooms of AA, NA, whatever your A is, I guess, we talk about the gift of desperation, and that transformation is the gift of desperation in a way, right? Like you reach a moment of desperation where you give up. And
so it's the reward.
Yeah, it's the
reward.
And it's this paradox that, you just kind of throw your hands up in frustration because you wish you could bottle the formula, and go out and hawk it. But it's just, there's a moment where you hit a wall. You've had this, haven't you? Just some moment in your life where you've had some moment of suffering, some experience of like, I can't do it. And suddenly you give up. There's something in you that says, I give up to something else in you. And this dilation of the chest happens and you start to breathe more easily. And you're like, oh, that feels good to give up. Like, yeah. I surrender.
No, yeah. I think we've all been there.
So I know you've just written this book, Coach Builder, and there's so much we could talk about on this subject because that's a lot of what I do now is working mostly in the corporate space. And I try to explain this sometimes when people want to change. I'm like, well, part of this thing is there's a paradox at play, which is to realize that your willpower, like most of what you're fighting against inside of yourself, eats willpower for lunch. Like it's hard. The metaphor I use sometimes is this, like, you're trying to change this behavior in yourself is like a traffic cone trying to stop an avalanche. It's just,
what's the relationship between what you're talking about right now and the desire for control? Because to me, to that earlier story, diagnosed with heart failure, there was 10 days between the diagnosis, which happened on Easter Sunday, and my meeting with the cardiologist. And during that 10 days, for very good reason, was 100% convinced I had 1 to 5 years to live.
Yes.
You have an 80% chance of being dead in 5 years once you're diagnosed.
Yep.
Now, my particular heart failure was not. It turned out to be probably it's an electrical system in the heart that got stunned, so it's not the same. But I didn't know that, and until I finally met with the cardiologist, who said, I finally just point blank said, "Am I here in 20 years?" He goes, "Oh yeah, you're here in 20 years." There was a struggle, the struggle that I had to deal with in terms of, one, knowing that you're going to die of heart failure, which basically means you drown. You drown because your lungs fill up with fluid. Mm-hmm. You are slowly, over the course of a year or two, you're slowly being suffocated. It's an awful way to die. So there was a fear of that, but there was also a fear of death itself. Mm-hmm. And to me, the gift of that whole psychological journey, and again, it was a psychological journey, not a medical journey in the sense that the whole time I was okay, was control over life itself, that I control when I go, whether I go, which ultimately is an absolute fantasy that I found on the other side of that, before I knew I wasn't going to die, was incredibly I was shocked at that I came to the conclusion of I'm fine with it. I'm not okay leaving a 3-year-old and all that stuff, but listen, I've got life insurance. They're going to be okay. And to me, that was the gift of ultimately surrender, of just like, you know what, there's a good chance there's something on the other side of this, and there's a good chance it's really going to be good.
All right, so we're going to share a moment here. So right before I left for Mexico, Anthony's smiling because he knows the story I'm going to tell you. So right before I left for Mexico, I went to the doctor because I thought I had sleep apnea, right? Something was going on with my breathing.
Something's disrupting your
I
sleep.
just, I was whatever. And he said, okay, well, we can order this oral appliance to keep your jaw out, and give you, he said, but let's just do a chest x-ray. So they do a chest x-ray, and he calls me and he says, hey, look, something turned up on your x-ray. And so we want to do a high imaging,
Like cardiac MRI?
Yeah, some big, much, clearer thing, right? So he leaves on vacation that day. I get the order,
always,
as it always goes. I get right. So I get the order for the X-ray, and along the top of the order it says suspected pulmonary fibrosis. So I'm like, I don't know what that is. So I look it up. It's very bad. Like pulmonary fibrosis, a year to 3 years.
Oh, goodness. Ian, we went through the same journey.
So I just spiraled, helixed, just.
And he's on vacation, so
I can't get a hold of him. So I finally get a hold of the partner, and she's like, well, we just don't know yet, so we have to hang tight. And it's like, oh, golly whiz, you're like reading a script from medical school to me. It's driving me crazy. So I then left for Jackson Hole, Wyoming for a week. I don't tell Ann because why ruin a vacation, right? Like we're going on vacation with another couple. So I'm in Jackson Hole and just thinking, pulmonary fibrosis, like what? Like, but the doctor said, yeah, there's like some cloudiness and interstitial weird things in your lungs, right? Blah, 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 blah. So I come back, I have this other test done. Ended up then after that, I had to go see a pulmonologist. I had to have a whole series of tests done. And eventually all ends well, right? It turned out to be probably a problem with equipment, problem with, tests, actually. There are problems with tests, right?
Yeah.
But I have to say that the experience of that was really dramatic. Like, I don't think I had it was very, very frightening. And I called my sponsor on my way to see the pulmonologist, and he said something to me that was really life-changing. I said to him, I was trying to be brave. I'm on my way to the pulmonologist to have him give me the final reading on these x-rays, right? And he says, I said to him, I said, well, listen, everything will be all right. And he paused. There's like a silence on the phone. And he said, Ian, everything already is all right.
Wow.
And
that's really a beautiful perspective.
Oh my gosh.
Probably hard earned from your sponsor.
Yes.
There's a story behind that.
Yes. But just to say everything already is all right. I was with a young guy today who's in our program and wanted to have a conversation about his life, and it's in chaos and turmoil. And to be able to say, listen, it may not seem like it, but if there is a God, and I think there is, everything already is all right. Like, it's not going to be all right. It is all right. It's exactly what it's supposed to be right now. But I'm 63, you're 52. It takes a minute to learn these things, doesn't it?
Well, and here's what the reality that's hard. And also I'm banking on that it's beautiful. These were premonitions of a certain future.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you didn't just grapple with death, you grappled with death that is going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like whatever conclusions you came to, it's almost this sense for me of like, well, 20, 30 years, that it's going to happen. Nobody gets out of it. And it might be okay. It might actually end up being a really beautiful experience for you, which that was nice.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't actually, I don't think, fully integrated that experience into my life yet. You know what I mean? Like I think I still think about it. I still wonder about it. and how it has changed me. But I do know that I'm changed, and that experience was a real changer.
Don, did you ever watch Moonstruck with Cher? Do you remember that movie?
I did, but it's been a really long time.
You need to go back and watch it, because there's a whole sort of theme around the father trying to escape death, and Olympia Dukakis, who is Rose Castorini, and Vincent Gardenia. He's the father. He's what was his name? Cosmo. There's a great scene at the very end where they're all around the table, and all the stories kind of resolve. But Rose tells Cosmo, "You're gonna die," and he's having an affair because he's trying to escape death. Is what she's come up with. It's you need to go back and revisit that with some of the stuff that
Okay,
you're
I'm
saying.
gonna Moonstruck. All right,
It's great. Yeah.
Don, in closing, my friend,
we were all over the place.
we were all over the place, but I don't care.
Well,
I
this
had
is
a ball.
great. Yeah.
So
I did.
So let me ask you this. Are you living any differently in the wake of that experience? Has anything shifted or transformed inside of you?
Yes, a little bit, and I trust it's going to come back. It was always very important for me. It's literally in my life plan that a new career after maybe I sell my company and would be to run for office. It's always been in the plan.
I remember that. Yeah.
And then a book also. I started researching and have a research assistant on a book called The Narrative Leader, which I think could be maybe my most important contribution, taking all the story structure stuff and then talking about how leaders can invite their constituents into story, and looking at Hitler and Mother Teresa and Churchill, and and analyzing the story they invited people into and analyzing why it's so important, and also exposing manipulation. What was shocking to me is when I found out that I was going to die, which is what I believed at the time, none of that mattered. I mean, it wasn't even none of it mattered. I didn't grieve the fact that I'm not going to be able to do those things. And I had nothing left to prove to the world. And I felt like God was completely satisfied with the way I lived this life. In other words, I felt his grace as a father to a son, of just saying, hey, you got I just love you. And so the weird ramifications are I've lost a lot of motivation. Because why? He's good. Life is good. My family loves me. I love them. I'm having trouble going to work. And I hope I get it back, but I don't need it.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
So I think that's a good thing in the long run, hopefully.
No, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's also indicative of, I think, the stage of life too, right? Like there's a moment at which you begin to ask and try to answer different questions. Your 50s and 60s, there's just a different set of questions that present themselves that matter. Yeah. Your attention migrates towards, toward the sort of more ultimate life questions versus ones that are slightly more temporal, So
Yeah.
Beautiful. Don Miller, Enneagram 3, Enneagram 4. I don't know.
Well, I'm now confused. I thought I thought this podcast was to clarify.
Sometimes that's not my job. No, I think, as I think about it, and now that I'm back in Nashville, I hope we have opportunity to spend more time together. But I think if you are a 4, you're a self-preservation 4 of the kind I just mentioned. I'm
going to do a little research on that now.
And
self-preservation
4. They often look like 3s or 7s. I mean, so I don't want to mention names, but we have many friends who are social 4s, and you can almost feel the suffering radiating off them in their body language, in the way they talk, the way they write songs, everything, right?
Yes.
But the glad 4, not the sad 4, the self-preservation 4 does not radiate that energy. And they often look like 3s or 7s, but they share the struggle with envy. They share that feeling that there is something missing inside that they have to compensate for. and that without which they're not going to ever fully belong. But what happens is that the envy motivates them to succeed in their given field or their given endeavors to get what they lack. And social fours can just sit around forever imagining what they're going to do, and then they get stuck in the victim thing, and they get that self-preservation 4 is a fighter, man. They fight for it. They get out there and they work hard, but they're long suffering. So we like to say sometimes that the self-pres 4 is long suffering. The social 4 is just suffering, and the 1-to-1 4s make others suffer. Right?
Well, of those 3, I'll take the self-preserving.
Well, you get what you get.
There's more money in it.
There's more money in it. Back to 3. All right, Don Miller, thank you again, Typology Tribe. As always, may you have love, may you have joy, may you have peace, may you have healing, and may you have rest. Until next time.